Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's Black History Series presentation titled Social Justice and Regional Connections, Black Baseball in 1930s Kent and Essex Counties with Dr. Miriam Wright. Miriam Wright is an associate professor of history at the University of Windsor, where she has taught Canadian history since 2003. She grew up in Southern Ontario, attending Western and Queen's universities. For her PhD, she moved east during doing research on the history of Atlantic coast fisheries at Memorial University of Newfoundland. About 15 years ago, she began working on a public history project on Chinese immigration to Newfoundland with her partner, Robert Hong, and the local Chinese Newfoundland community. She continued to research this topic and published an article with two more forthcoming on the history of Chinese immigration to Newfoundland. In 2015, she embarked on another public history project, this time featuring the Chatham Colored All-Stars. She co-directed this project with colleagues at the University of Windsor, along with families of the former players, the Chatham Sports Hall of Fame, and the Chatham Kent Black Historical Society. A website breaking the color barrier, Wilfred Boomer Harding and the Chatham Colored All-Stars launched in 2017. Her book, Sporting Justice, The Chatham Colored All-Stars and Black Baseball in Southwestern Ontario, 1915 to 1958, was published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press in August 2023. Dr. Wright has also generously made arrangements with her publishers to offer a discount code for anyone watching today's presentation. An important note, this code is good until the end of February 2024, so this February. Dr. Wright's instructions for the discount code, which I've posted in the chat as well, but for those not present today, I will read the instructions out loud so you know how to take advantage of that code. To use the code, go directly to Dr. Wright's book, Sporting Justice, on the Wilfrid Laurier University Press website, which I've included in the chat. And on our Facebook page, I'll also share that link after the presentation. Click on the paperback link and the order form will pop up. The code is SJ0124. Again, it's SJ0124, and it is already listed on the order page by the coupon code slot. So just click on it or type it in to activate it. The book is already discounted at 20%, so this code will add an additional 10% for a total of 30%, which is very generous. Just another note before we begin today, if everyone wouldn't mind turning off their camera and muting their microphones while Dr. Wright is presenting, just so that it doesn't distract. Also, following her presentation, there will be a question and answer period, so just type in your questions in the comment section, or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. At this point, you're welcome to turn on your microphone and your camera. And one final note, if you would like to support programming such as the Black History Series, you can donate to the museum by going to our website, amherstburgfreedom.org. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wright. Thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Lorraine, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It's really wonderful to be able to share this through the Amherstburg Freedom Museum monthly talk. And thanks to Lorraine and Mary Catherine for organizing this and allowing me to speak to you today. Now, this talk comes out of my research I did for my book, Sporting Justice. There we go. There. Now, Chatham All-Stars were a Black men's baseball team from Chatham, Ontario in the 1930s. At a time when sports society as a whole was largely racially segregated, the team moved into the primarily white world of organized amateur baseball. There you go. In 1934, in just their second year in the league, the All-Stars won a provincial championship, the first and I think only time a Black team did so. And this picture here was taken sometime in the fall of 1934. They continued to be an influence in regional baseball, reaching the provincial playoffs twice more before they disbanded at the end of the 1940 season. In my book is a larger social history of the All-Stars that focuses on the team as well as the broader history of Black baseball in this region, both before and after the All-Stars played. As Lorraine mentioned in her introduction, my interest in the All-Stars arose from a public history project that began over 8 years ago. Quite by chance, I happened to meet Patricia Harding, daughter-in-law of the late Wilfrid Boomer Harding, who is one of the players. And Wilfrid Harding is in the picture. You see in the back row back row, second from the right. And his older brother, who I'll also mention during this talk, is Len Harding, and he's seated first row on the far right. And so after the website was launched in 2017, we've really been sort of gratified that the story of this team has really snowballed in a lot of ways, with a lot of different people sort of taking part and celebrating it apart from us. The Chatham-Kent Black Historical Society includes it in the programming, and every year they hold a Field of Honor baseball team where descendants of players get together for a game. My colleague, Heidi Jacobs, who is my partner on the original website, she also published a book this spring called 1934, which focuses on their 1934 championship season. And a lot of other really exciting things have happened in 2022. The team was inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in the Trailblazer category. And in the picture on the left, you'll see three sons of the original Chatham College All-Stars player. That's Blake Harding, son of Wilfred Boomer Harding. Next to him is Don Tabron Jr., son of Don Tabron, who played on the team. He was one of the members who came from Detroit. And on the far right, of course, is Fergie Jenkins Jr. His father played on that team between 1935 and 1939. Also, just most recently, if you've seen the CBC series Black Life, that one of the episodes featured the Chatham College All-Stars. So that's another place where you can sort of follow that story. Now today, as you can see from my title, I wanted to talk about the relationship between baseball and social justice in the 1930s and 1940s. Sports historians have long drawn a relationship between sports and civil rights. Besides being a source of pride for marginalized communities, sport offered a space for Black players to interact with and compete with white athletes. It was, as sports historian Rob Ruff notes, quote, a forum for symbolic political assertion and an arena for real political struggle, end quote. The Chatham College All-Stars and other Black teams in this region, simply by moving into white sporting spaces, asserted themselves, making a claim to legitimacy, the right to be there. As well, sports had standard sets of rules and protocols, ostensibly treating all players the same, even if it didn't always work that way in practice. Although winning the 1934 provincial championship brought the All-Stars' attention and accolades, it was really in the years following that historic win that the team grew more confident and increasingly vocal. They became more adept at dealing with the politics of organized baseball and more willing to speak out against unfair and racist treatment. So today I will talk about how and why that happened. But more than simply looking at the All-Stars, however, I also wanted to emphasize that this team was also part of the community, that other people in different ways were advocating for greater civil and economic rights for Black people. And they, in turn, were connected to Black communities throughout southwestern Ontario and across the river to Detroit. So I'll talk a little bit about those connections and what they tell us about the larger ways that change was happening. I want to begin, however, by talking about the wider culture of Black baseball in this region. While the Chatham College All-Stars were important, they were just one of many, many Black teams that existed in southern Ontario since the late 19th century. Baseball was played at community gatherings, picnics, and were featured at celebrations, Emancipation Day celebrations on August 1st, foremost among them. Girls, as well as boys, played, with girls more likely to play softball, beginning in the 1920s when that sport became very much more popular. Here's a picture of the Buxton girls softball team, circa 1927. But there were also girls teams in Chatham, and also in London in that period. Baseball also came from across the border, with Black touring teams from the United States, which began playing exhibition games in southwestern Ontario towns from the late 19th century. The Page Fence Giants, for example, is one of those teams. Excluded from professional leagues, these Black American teams developed a distinctive style of baseball, faster, more athletic, more dynamic, which added to the interest in the game. In fact, in the early 20th century, Black teams from Chatham, Buxton, and London modeled themselves in part on the American Black touring teams played exhibition games around the region. show you a picture here. This is actually a picture of a London team from the 1920s called the London Colored Stars. They played in the 20s. They had a very close relationship with their team in Chatham of the same era, the Chatham Colored Giants. Sort of interactions between those teams, and but they've just played exhibition games. They did not play in leagues. Those same traditions carried into the professional black leagues of the era, the so-called Negro leagues, with teams such as the Detroit Stars playing. In fact, in 1931, the Detroit Stars played an exhibition game in Windsor's Weigel Park. The press noted that the Stars, quote, outclassed their opponents in every department of the game, hitting, fielding, and pitching, and really might have racked up a dozen runs if they had been so inclined, end quote. Now, in the early 1930s, black teams which had previously been excluded from white organized baseball were invited to join local white amateur leagues in southwestern Ontario. So this was sort of a new development in the history of black baseball, because previously they'd been excluded. They included teams from London, Chatham Colored All-Stars, of course, formed in 1933, and a team from Windsor called the Windsor Colored Stars. Now, we don't know the full reason for this change of heart, but I suspect that the flagging fortunes of white organized baseball at the height of the Great Depression were a factor. And formed in 1933, the Windsor Colored Stars played out of Weigel Park in the historic black neighborhood known as the McDougall Street Corridor. And you can see from this picture on the far left, the coach manager of the Windsor Colored Stars was William Bush, or Bill Bush Sr. And I believe that's a picture of him on the far left, in the left-hand picture in the suit. Also in that picture on the far right is Earl Flat Chase, who would later play with the Chatham Colored All-Stars. And I believe the person in the middle is Ken Milburn, but please correct me if I'm wrong in the discussion afterwards if I didn't get that right. Other players included pitcher Jim Pettiford, catcher William Tuffy, Harry Morgan, M. Wilson, Percy Wilson, Roy Jenkins, Warren and Henry Allen. And Warren Allen, of course, was a longtime coach of youth baseball in Windsor. He was the father of the late Jim Allen. And there are also many others for whom I just have the surnames, because the newspapers often just gave the last names. They didn't give the first names. So Carter, Crum, Morrell, Finney, Harper were among some of the other names. And again, maybe in discussion afterwards, if you recognize some of those names, please let me know. Like the Chatham Colored All-Stars, the Windsor team had some very strong players, including their main pitcher, Jim Pettiford of Sandwich. Newspaper reporters regularly described Pettiford as one of the best pitchers in the league. Another early standout was Earl Flat Chase, who later joined the Chatham Colored All-Stars at the end of the 1933 season. Local sports writers spoke highly of the Windsor team, with one describing them as, quote, one of the busiest and most capable aggregations in the district, end quote. In another article, the writer praised the talent of the team members with nods to Pettiford, their catcher William Tuffy, whom they called the Black Mickey Cochran, Cochran apparently being a legendary white professional player, and many others. The Windsor Stars were also in demand as an exhibition team, and they played all around the district. In fact, in 1936, the Windsor Colored Stars joined up with players from Michigan and played exhibition games for the season. A newspaper report on a 1935 game at Weigel Park reveals the kind of the showy style and relationship with fans that was characteristic of early 20th century black baseball culture, when it noted that, quote, Percy Williams, Stars left fielder, stole home in the fifth and told the fans he would do it again, and lived up to his promise by duplicating the feat in the ninth. So again, both the base stealing and that bold call out to the crowd were features of early 20th century black baseball culture. You can sort of see it sort of being replicated in these local teams. The team was active and talented, but unlike the Chatham Colored All-Stars, never played in a league affiliated with the provincial body, the Ontario Baseball Amateur Association, that's OBAA, which means that they had no chance to compete for provincial championships like the Chatham team did. The Windsor Stars played in city and county leagues, but none were affiliated with the provincial organization. Now, Essex County did have an OBAA league, but the Stars weren't included. And as far as we know, not even Jim Pettiford, who a reporter described as being, quote, one of the best all-around ball players in Essex County, end quote, played on any of those OBAA teams. Why not? Well, I don't know enough about the Essex County Baseball Organization to know specifically what happened. But access to OBAA-affiliated teams was controlled by a small group of white men. And the black players, because of wider racism, may not have had enough pull or influence to make it past them. In both Chatham and London, where the teams were able to get into the OBAA leagues, they both had influential white advocates that helped them get into that league. So that may have been the difference in why the Windsor team did not have that opportunity. So it's a kind of a what-if moment. Could the Windsor team have had similar success as Chatham? We don't know, but I think that's why, while we recognize the achievements of the Chatham County All-Stars and their place in history, we also have to remember that there were many, many others who did not get the chance. Now, I'd like to turn now to the Chatham County All-Stars themselves. This is a picture of the team members taken in 1942. This was actually taken a couple of years after the team disbanded, and they were playing on other teams. Let's talk about those connections between sport, social justice, and the community. From oral history interviews done with family members of the team, we get a sense of how much the All-Stars meant to them and to the Black community at the time. Wanda Milburn, younger sister of Chatham County All-Stars player Wilfred Boomer Harding, and then Harding. Wilfred Harding in this picture is the guy in the back row in the center wearing the captors gear. And in 1980 interview, she said, quote, the All-Stars were a colored ball team who played in the Depression years and who made history, who had a lot of fun together and a lot of trouble together too. John Olby, younger brother of All-Star Cliff Olby, who was interviewed in 2016, said when the All-Stars came riding back into town after winning the 1934 championship, people, quote, just hollered and cheered them because nothing like that had ever happened in China. They had all kinds of white fans, colored fans. They were all Ontario winners, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon, end quote. Though these interviews took place many decades later, after the All-Stars had disbanded, details suggested a significance beyond fond memories of a good ball team. It has been noted by sports historians Ornella Nsuduki-Imana, Kevin Walmsley, and others, sports were a source of pride and positivity for racially marginalized communities. As for the All-Stars themselves, what I find most remarkable is their transformation after the 1934 win, and they became increasingly confident and independent and vocal. Some of this confidence came from their continued success and influence in regional baseball throughout the 1930s. After they won the 1934 championship, the All-Stars were invited into a more competitive league, comprised of the top teams from southwestern Ontario, including London, Sarnia, and Strathroy. The All-Stars did very well in this circuit, winning the regional title in 1935 and coming in second in 1936, giving them an even higher regional profile than they had had in 1934. I believe that higher profile, along with their growing ease in dealing with league officials and protocols and politics of white amateur baseball, contributed to the team's increasing independence. By the late 1930s, team leaders, including players Ross and Ben Talbot. Ross Talbot is the back row, second from the right, and his brother Ben is bottom row, second from the right. And Len Harding, who I mentioned earlier, were more visible, advocating for the team, challenging decisions that went against them and speaking out against unfair treatment. And most significantly, they were speaking directly to the local press, making sure that their side of the story was heard. And I can't emphasize how important that was. At a time when Black people were expected to accept the racist order of things and remain silent, this team was saying in public, we deserve to be treated fairly, even if just on the baseball field. This simply didn't happen in 1933 and 1944, and the team also experienced racist treatment, yet in the pages of the press, their voices were absent. I see this confidence most particularly in the 1939 season. Managed that year by player Len Harding, the All-Stars openly challenged both the Chatham City League and the Ontario Baseball Association, OBA. They shortened their name in 1939 over various issues. Several times that year, Lynn Harding turned to the sports editor of the Chatham Daily News to get their story out there. After a series of disputes with officials of the Chatham City Baseball League, Harding wrote a letter about the team's position and got it published in the Chatham Daily News. In explaining their complaint, Harding was signaling their right to be treated fairly and with due process. Again, that may seem like a small thing. It would not be particularly remarkable if it was done by a white person. For a black person to go to the press in that time, in that place, and say, we want fair treatment, was highly significant. The 1939 season was indeed a tumultuous one, and the All-Stars also publicly challenged the Ontario Baseball Association over unfair and clearly racist treatment they experienced over arrangements for the final game of the intermediate A title. They had reached the finals for the provincial championship in 1939, and this was the final best of three series. The All-Stars title for the run, however, got derailed when a member of the OBA executive, J.C. McDonald, used his influence and position to make very controversial decisions about the location of the final game in the best of three series. Normally, a tie-breaking game was held in a town halfway between the two communities so that each would share an equal burden of the cost and the time. The All-Stars were playing a team from Meaford, which, if you don't know Southwestern Ontario geography, is about 220 miles away from Chatham, on the shores of Georgian Bay. Now, the teams had each won home games, and instead of playing that third game somewhere halfway between the two communities, McDonald declared that they would play in a place called Hanover, which is only 60 miles from Meaford, but 150 miles from Chatham. Moreover, McDonald would not guarantee that the All-Stars would receive the full travel allowance owed to them per the OBA Constitution. The sticking point, because the All-Stars had received only half of what had been owed them for their previous game that they had taken to Meaford. This is a sticking point because it was expensive to travel. The players had to take time off work, and of course they lost wages, so it was a real financial burden to take part in these championships. The All-Stars immediately protested, and then Harding made a flurry of phone calls to various league officials trying to find a solution. Although race was never mentioned publicly during the dispute, the fact that the All-Stars were treated in ways outside the norm for that organization suggests the racist roots. As well, McDonald made some hostile and threatening comments about the All-Stars in the press, revealing a deeper animosity. And he could make those moves because of who he was, a white man with power. It is hard to imagine him acting that way against a white team from London or Strathroy, which again suggests the racist thread that is a part of this encounter. I mean, there's no way he would have treated, a team from a very strong baseball town such as London in the same way. When the negotiations with the OBA broke down, Len Harding again turned to the local press to garner support. In fact, in a brilliant public relations move, Harding announced in the Chatham Daily News that the All-Stars wanted the opinion of their fans about whether they should go to that OBA game as arranged in Hanover. The paper instructed people to call the sports desk of the Chatham Daily News or the barber shop where Len Harding worked with their votes. And this is social media before social media. You can imagine, just really sort of taking the initiative to sort of make their voices heard, to get their opinions out there, and to get people on side, get people to support them. Now, according to Chatham Daily News, calls flooded into the sports desk, and almost all of them urged the team not to go to Hanover for the game. After consulting with the team, Harding announced that they would not go unless a new location or fair compensation were secured. Harding explained, quote, "All we ask is for a fair break. And everyone knows that we would gladly travel as far as the other fellows. But Hanover, just 60 miles from Meaford, is out of the question." End quote. Unfortunately, there was no happy ending, as Harding was not able to get the OBA to meet their demands, and the final game was never played. Nevertheless, the OBA was forced to do some damage control, particularly after the public relations efforts of Len Harding led sports writers from across southern Ontario to cover the story. In the midst of the dispute, McDonald had declared Meaford the winners by default. After mounting criticism, however, the OBA rescinded McDonald's earlier statement, declaring instead that the 1939 title would remain undecided. While we don't know how Black people in the community reacted or thought as they watched these events unfold in public, there was certainly a powerful symbolism in a Black team standing up, saying they deserve to be treated fairly, and deciding that some things were more important than winning a baseball title. And also, one of the other sort of repercussions of this was that the original league that the Chatham County All-Stars played in actually withdrew from the OBA for a period of 4 years over this contest. Now, as the Chatham County All-Stars were developing a more vocal and visible approach to dealing with conflict, it's important to situate them in their community, where parallel movements of change were happening. While I'm not aware of any members of the Chatham County All-Stars being directly involved in organizations or advocacy, they were certainly connected to people who were. And they would have been well aware of what was happening around them in the nearby community. The Dawn of Tomorrow newspaper, for example, founded in London in the 1920s, promoted and supported Black labor organizations such as the NAACP. The paper was sold in Chatham, and in fact, Beulah Harding, the older sister of several members of the Chatham County All-Stars, was the local correspondent for this newspaper. Here, that's a picture of Beulah Harding on the far left picture. She's top row far left. Now, this is a picture from her normal school class picture. She went to this college in London. And Wanda Harding, who I mentioned earlier, she also did some advocacy. She during World War II, she complained. She actually wrote a letter to the premier because Bell Telephone wasn't hiring any Black women to work as telephone operators, and she made a complaint about that. And that's her in the picture of the far left. And as noted by Irene Moore Davis, just down the road from Chatham in Windsor in the 1930s, the Central Citizens Association was embarking on their campaign to encourage local white businesses, to encourage local white businesses in the city of Windsor to hire Black people. The churches were another source of activism and spread of ideas, particularly as visiting ministers from the United States often came to speak about Black churches in the Borden region. As Chatham's Emancipation Day celebrations in 1939, for example, clergymen from the BME Church in North Buxton and the First Institutional Baptist Church of Hamtramck in Detroit spoke to the crowd about the need for Black people to come together for greater civil and economic rights. Reverend Benjamin H. Wright of Detroit affirmed that, quote, the demand of the colored man today is for justice, end quote. Now again, I don't know if members of the Chatham County All-Stars were in the crowd that day at Emancipation Day listening to those speeches, but these messages were in the churches. They were in the community where they lived. When a ball team stood up to demand fair treatment, they weren't doing so from a vacuum. They were from a community, from a network of communities, where these ideas and assertions were already established and modeled. Another example of this relationship, in 1935, someone who seemed to be connected to the Chatham County All-Stars sent an anonymous letter to the editor of the Chatham Daily News, criticizing both the racism the Black team was experiencing and racist coverage in area newspapers. Now, the letter itself is remarkable in a number of ways, as it mirrored the language found in other letters and speeches of Black activists in that period. The author assured the readers that the team was grateful for the support they had received over the years, but they needed more than friends in good times. Quote, we implore you, the letter said, to attempt to see the game as it is going on this summer from an unbiased sporting angle, end quote. Asking for understanding in the face of racist treatment, the author said, quote, all we ask is for Canadian sporting justice in a Canadian sporting town. And they concluded with an appeal to a common citizenry and identity, quote, for the old Maple City and for democracy, be with us. Although we don't know the author, identified only as, quote, a colored fan, It was someone who had been speaking with the team members and had perhaps been with the team at the away game referenced in the letter. So there's a few clues in the letter suggesting this person was connected with this team and had inside information from them. But the fact that I could identify several plausible authors, people with connections to the All-Stars and who are known advocates in the community, is significant. Possible candidates, a member of the Harding family, who had connections to progressive circles, as I already mentioned before, Beulah Harding and their sister Wanda. There was also another Harding sister, Georgina, who was actually a legal secretary. And she actually got her start in Amherstburg, working for, you might guess, Frederick Davis, who was the son of Delos Burgess Davis, who was, of course, one of the first Black lawyers to practice law in Ontario. After Fred Davis died in 1926, Georgina landed a job with a Black law firm in Detroit, where one of the partners, Charles Roxborough, was the first Black state senator in Michigan, and another partner, Charles Jones, later became the state's first Black judge. Roxborough was also the brother of John Roxborough, longtime manager for boxer Joe Louis. You see all the connections. Once you start looking, the connections are everywhere. Another possible author with direct ties to the Chatham All-Stars was Orville Wright. Orville Wright was the team scorekeeper and secretary. He had also been a community advocate for years, and with his wife Evelyn, later spearheaded recreational programs for Black youth in Chatham. Another possibility, scorekeeper and secretary for the All-Stars in the late 1930s, Bethune Binga Sr. and his daughter Dorothy. Both of them were local correspondents for the Chicago Defender, America's most prominent Black newspaper at the time. And of course, Bethune Binga's father, Jesse C. Binga, had become the first Black bank owner in the United States when he founded his company in Chicago. Bethune Binga also coached a team for Black youth in the community in that same period. So again, his ties with that team and with Black baseball were very, very strong. And of course, as many of you know, the Binga family of Chatham is related to the Binga family of Amherstburg. Reverend Anthony Binga. It's believed that they were cousins. So you don't need to look very far to see relationships between this Black team from Chatham and the wider network of people and ideas who are working for change. And I think that helps to give a more nuanced look at the nature of activism in this period. As for the Chatham County All-Stars themselves, they continued to be influential in local sports and in the community after the team disbanded in 1940. Most significantly, they helped racially integrate local baseball by moving on to white teams in the 1940s. In fact, those teams won a series of provincial championships in that period, and the Black players gained even higher profiles in the wider community than they had during the 1930s. At the same time, however, younger Black players continued to face barriers getting access to white teams. So when that became apparent, former members of the Chatham County All-Stars formed new Black baseball teams for younger people to get a chance. So this included the Taylor Athletic Club team of the 1940s and the Chatham Panthers of the 1950s. And this is a picture of the Chatham Panthers in the 1950s. This team also had a number of Windsor players on it. A.B. Scott, originally from Chatham, but he was living in Windsor at the time. Lauren Foster is another Windsor player who also played on this team. But and so the reason I sort of bring that story in is because, again, this is sort of example of that kind of the intergenerational legacy of Black baseball in Chatham and the region, how the players in the 20s supported the players in the 30s, players from the 30s supported the players in the 40s and 50s. So it's a very sort of long story of community support, which I think is very, very important. And as for the move for civil rights also continued throughout the region. In fact, in the 1940s in Chatham, Buxton, and Dresden, members founded the National Unity Association, pushed the Ontario government to introduce legislation to make discrimination on the basis of race or religion in employment and in public life illegal. In fact, one of the founders of the organization was the first cousin of one of the Chatham County All-Stars players, Boy Ladd, Alvin Ladd, Amherstburg and UA. In Windsor, groups tested that legislation, continued the fight on the ground and through the courts. And so my final point is that when you think about Black baseball teams and how they moved into white sporting spaces, we also need to remember that they were also part of community, where people had long been working to make a better world. And I think I will leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that incredibly interesting presentation. I am like my number one interest in terms of Black history is activism. So I love that you've taken such a unique approach in incorporating sports into that. I did have a couple questions I wanted to ask. Um,
Sure.
so I apologize if you did mention this already, but you'd mentioned the Chatham Colored All Stars and other teams like the Windsor Stars and stuff like that. But in their activism, did you find that it was more, or had you noticed that when they combated racism and discriminatory practices, were multiple teams working together, or did you find that it was more an individual team basis? Or community, like so a community like London, for example, or Chatham, like on an individual basis? Or do you have any examples of teams coming together, multiple teams together to combat this racism?
I think that actually just to warn you, I'm getting a notice on my laptop that my battery is running low. So if I
Okay, no problem. Oh, it seems that Miriam's camera has frozen. Are you there, Miriam? Okay, what we'll do is because her computer is frozen, her battery may have died. What we'll do is if you have any questions that you would like um, to ask Miriam, please reach out to us through our social media, and we'll be sure to pass that on to Miriam. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you again, Dr. Wright, for presenting such an interesting presentation. Thank you, everyone.